There's something oddly poetic about the way a velvet rope decides who matters. On one side, it's handshakes, name tags, and designer dresses in shades of smug accomplishment. On the other, it's everything the velvet dares not acknowledge, like the woman standing silently near the side exit, adjusting her sleeves not out of nervousness, but principle. Her name wasn't on the lips of the ushers or etched into a gold plaque, but if you've ever read a headline about public accountability or seen a Wall Street CEO squirm under oath, you probably owe that silence to her. Letitia James, New York Attorney General, veteran of a very different battlefield, one where subpoenas replaced shrapnel and the front line ran straight through City Hall. Today, though, she wasn't here to make a case. She wasn't here to investigate. She was just here to sit in the front row for her nephew. That's all. One seat. Close enough to hear his name before the applause swallowed it. That's what he wrote, in his own careful cursive. "Aunt Letitia, I want you right up front." But justice, it turns out, doesn't come with a lanyard. The university auditorium was overflowing. It pulsed with the energy of new beginnings, parents practically levitating with pride, phones held skyward like offerings, every row a battalion of balloon bouquets and Instagram-ready smiles. The seating chart looked like a corporate gala had crashed into a commencement speech. White satin ribbons draped over name tags. Entire sections cordoned off behind taut red ropes. VIPs only. Letitia didn't bring an entourage. She didn't need one. She brought something heavier. The weight of knowing where she'd come from and who she'd come for. When she approached the reserved section, a young woman with a headset intercepted her like a linebacker in pearls. "Ma'am, this area is for honored guests only," she said, not bothering to hide the once-over glance. A subtle flick of the eyes, hair natural, jacket practical, shoes unbranded. "You'll need to stand back." Letitia didn't blink. "My nephew's graduating. I'm on his list. First row, left side." The usher gave a tight smile that had clearly been practiced in front of a mirror. "I don't care who you are. Step aside or security will remove you." Two guards approached, all polyester suits and managerial detachment. Not aggressive, just bored, efficient, the kind of people who confuse firmness with importance. Letitia exhaled, not with rage, but with the kind of long, slow breath a woman learns when she's had to explain herself one too many times to people who already made up their minds. "You've got a list. Check it," she said, voice flat, not raised. "Be thorough. He wrote me in pen." But the usher had already looked past her, waving in another pair of parents in pearls and pressed collars. One glance at the row behind her, and you could feel it. Half of them pretending not to look, the other half pretending not to judge. Yet, in the fifth row, 3 people didn't flinch. They saw the whole thing. They knew exactly who she was. They just didn't speak yet. See, when a woman like Letitia James walks into a room unannounced, she isn't unrecognized. She's inconvenient. And if there's one thing institutions hate more than scandal, it's being reminded who's really done the work. She didn't need to carry a microphone to command a room. Her silence already did. She didn't step forward again. She didn't argue. She just moved to the side wall and stood still, shoulders squared, spine straight, eyes fixed on the stage. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here to see him. And yes, she brought the invitation. Folded once, no creases, stored in the inner lining of her coat. The words still clear. "Aunt Letitia, I want you in the front row." So she waited. Not in protest, not in anger, but in expectation. Because even when the institutions forget who paved the path, those who walked it never do. And Tyler? He hadn't forgotten. Not for a second. No ID? No pass? Then step aside. The usher's voice carried the confident monotone of someone who mistook her clipboard for a constitution. No hint of irony. No flicker of awareness. Just pure institutional arrogance wrapped in a headset and polyester blazer. Letitia James didn't argue. That's the part that made it worse for them. She didn't raise her voice, didn't pull out a badge, didn't reach for a business card or name-drop a governor. She simply inhaled, once, slow and controlled. You don't last decades in American politics, especially as a black woman standing between billion-dollar corruption and a witness stand, by flinching at a 20-something event planner with a fake smile and an earpiece. But there was something in the air now, a crackling tension that didn't come from insult. She was used to those. It wasn't fear, and God knows it wasn't shame. It was colder, more surgical. The old, familiar scent of decorum weaponized against decency. She stepped back just half a step, as instructed, still composed, still dignified. And in that simple act, the auditorium performed its most honest trick of the morning, collective invisibility. The front rows, wrapped in carefully curated respectability, didn't see her. No, they saw her just fine, but only the parts they chose to register. The untailored coat, the absence of pearls, the posture too straight to be deferential. To them, she wasn't Letitia James. She was just someone. Someone without a pass, someone without a title card, someone in the wrong place. She drifted toward the side door, not dismissed, repositioned, by them, for their comfort. Her hands clasped calmly behind her back, her eyes fixed on the stage. She wasn't posturing. She wasn't protesting. She was just present. And for some people in that room, presence was the loudest kind of threat. The lights dimmed. The mic clicked. A pre-recorded voice, smooth as marble and twice as cold, echoed through the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today we honor excellence, determination, achievement. Please welcome our distinguished guests and faculty. Cue the synchronized seating. Rows of suits rustled like pressed leaves. Laughter buzzed in tiny, well-trained frequencies. And there, near the fire exit, stood one figure still vertical, still silent. Letitia James. She didn't need a program. She had a purpose. She didn't need a seat. She'd held her ground in much tougher rooms. The usher passed her again, this time accompanied by another staffer with the slick discomfort of someone preparing to escalate a non-incident. They didn't realize she could hear them, or maybe they assumed she wouldn't understand. Still standing there, I don't think she's even invited. Just flag her for security, discreetly. Discreetly. The favorite adverb of every coward dressed as a professional. A few necks turned, curious. One man in a burgundy tie raised an eyebrow like he'd spotted an expired coupon at a country club brunch. But Letitia didn't move. She'd faced entire legislative chambers more hostile than this. She'd walked into rooms where no one clapped until she spoke. This was just ornamental prejudice, dipped in politeness, wrapped in etiquette. Then it came, the real cherry on the ceremony. The dean's son, of course it was the dean's son, walked out in full regalia, grinning like he'd just aced a TED Talk audition. He greeted the audience with his best political intern cadence. "We thank the families who supported these graduates," he announced. Then he paused, just long enough for the cameras to frame him at his most virtuous. Especially, he added, the presentable ones who represent the values we teach. There it was, delivered with the kind of confidence that only comes from a lifetime of never being interrupted. A dog whistle wrapped in silk, a rhetorical landmine made to sound like a compliment. Laughter followed, not raucous, not wild, just polite. The kind of chuckles people emit when they know what's being said but want to pretend they didn't hear it. Letitia didn't blink. She didn't even twitch. But somewhere in the fifth row, a few backs straightened. A few sets of eyes, older, sharper, narrowed ever so slightly. No movement, no words. But they saw what was happening, because when an institution disguises exclusion as tradition, it always expects the excluded to bow in thanks. And Letitia, she'd spent her entire life unlearning that reflex. The story, however, was just getting warmed up, and across that fifth row, a silent current began to build, one that wouldn't need microphones, stage time, or permission to be heard. But row 5 had other plans. They weren't influencers or donors or the types who corrected Latin pronunciation on cocktail napkins. No, these were men who knew how to keep secrets and how to end them. Civilian clothes, buzz cuts camouflaged beneath neutral caps, their suits subtle but stitched with a different kind of authority. These weren't spectators. These were survivors, and they'd seen enough. One of them, taller, older, his jaw sharp as his silence, leaned forward, eyes never leaving the stage. That line, he muttered to the others, voice low and pointed, was aimed at her. No debate, just a synchronized nod, precise, quiet, like something rehearsed not in meetings, but in moments. Back by the wall, where dignified disregard had become policy, a security guard was dispatched with all the urgency of a man chasing paperwork rather than problems. He approached Letitia with a clipboard, the tool of choice for bureaucrats pretending neutrality. "Ma'am," he said, the word coated in caution, "we've had some concerns." Concerns, the most passive-aggressive noun in the American administrative vocabulary. It means someone powerful enough to complain did. He adjusted his tie like it was supposed to soften the insult. "Would you mind stepping outside until we verify your name on the list?" Letitia turned her head slowly, not with defiance. She had long since graduated from that impulse, but with the kind of calculation only a woman who'd cross-examined Wall Street could master. "I'm not causing trouble," she said, voice even, hands still folded. "My nephew asked me to be here. First row by name. I'm not moving until I see him walk that stage." The guard shifted. His tone adjusted, friendly but non-negotiable. "I understand, but I need you to come with me." Behind them, the whispers began to bloom like weeds in marble cracks. "They're removing that woman," came one voice, brittle with voyeuristic delight. "She's making people uncomfortable," muttered another. Translation: "She didn't shrink when we expected her to." Letitia looked at the guard, let out a breath, one of those long exhales that come from a place deeper than lungs. "All right," she said and stepped forward. No protest, no plea, just another quiet accommodation to institutional insecurity. But then a chair scraped, not loud but surgical, followed by another, then another. In the fifth row, 6 men rose, not out of habit, not by cue, but by purpose. No uniforms, no applause, no hashtags, just presence. Shoulders squared, eyes locked, arms fixed like they were still standing post in some other forgotten theater of conflict. They didn't look angry. They looked inevitable. The room turned with the grace of a courtroom in mid-reversal. Confused murmurs passed through rows like wind through glass. The tallest man stepped into the aisle, unhurried, unshaken, and walked straight toward the guard beside Letitia. No words. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, unassuming object. Not a press credential, not a donor badge, a Department of Justice service coin. The kind not given but earned, usually after watching something the public never hears about. Another man stepped beside him and revealed the same. Then another. Then another. 6 coins. 6 men. Not one of them blinked. The crowd froze, not out of fear, but recognition. That soundless recoil when you realize the system may have just embarrassed itself in front of the very people it was built to impress. The tallest man turned toward the guard, then slowly swept his eyes across the auditorium. His voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. It carried with the weight of someone who'd once testified under oath in front of Congress and meant every syllable. "That woman doesn't leave this room," he said calmly. "She walked us through fire. She's staying. Right. Here." And with that, the narrative began to fracture. Not loudly, not instantly, but definitively. The rows shifted again, but this time not in unison. Because no velvet rope, no roped-off ritual could erase what just unfolded. Someone they tried to render invisible had just been made undeniable. The air didn't just shift, it recalibrated. Not with a bang, not with a dramatic soundtrack, but with that quiet, seismic click that happens when a lie collapses under the weight of too many witnesses. 6 men still stood in the 5th row. Unmoving, unbothered. They weren't angry, they were inevitable. Their posture wasn't one of protest, but of protection, reverence. The kind of reverence that only exists between people who've stood in courtrooms no one applauded, written reports no one read, and stayed in the fight long after the press lost interest. The security guard, now frozen in a pose halfway between apology and paralysis, looked from one face to the next, then down. His hand was still holding the DOJ service coin that one of them had pressed into his palm. It wasn't big, it wasn't flashy, but suddenly it weighed more than a subpoena. I didn't know," the guard said, which is the chorus of every institution that enforces order without understanding legacy. The tallest among the 6 didn't reply. He didn't need to. His silence said, "You should have." A voice in the crowd whispered, "Who is she?" And then, quietly, deliberately, another man stood up, seated near the stage. His suit was formal, but not loud. Medals across his chest didn't clang. They stood. A relic from a different kind of battlefield, the one where memories are folded into flags and funerals. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "That woman," he said clearly, "is Letitia James. New York's Attorney General, the one who stood up when the rest of us stayed comfortable. The only reason some of your children didn't grow up under corrupt landlords and unchecked policing. She's the one who didn't blink when the banks did." The gasp that followed wasn't polite. It was real, audible, sharp. Someone in the back dropped a phone. Another finally looked away from their program pamphlet. Letitia hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. She just lowered her head slightly, jaw tight, shoulders still. Not angry, not surprised. Just tired. Tired of having to prove that legacy can walk quietly, that credibility doesn't always wear heels or Harvard, that if a woman builds a career holding others accountable, she shouldn't need to wear a pearl necklace for a chair in the front row. Then, another voice. This one wasn't planned. It cracked through the sound system like an interruption in ceremony. But it wasn't a disruption. It was correction. "Aunt Letitia," the voice called. Tyler Beck, on stage, robe loose around his shoulders, cap askew, mic shaking in his hand. But his voice? Clear, uneven, yes, but true. "That's my aunt," he said. "She never asked for recognition, never once made this about her. But every time I thought about quitting, about walking away from this degree, she told me, keep going, stand up, be someone you'd be proud to introduce." He paused, looked out over the crowd. "Today's supposed to be about my graduation, but I'm only proud because of her, and if she's not welcome here, then I'm not either." With that, Tyler removed his cap, stepped off the stage, and walked down the stairs. The crowd, this time, parted. No one told them to. They just moved. He reached Letitia and stood tall, chest out, straight posture. Then, in front of every guest, every administrator, and every camera, he saluted her. The 6 men in row 5 followed, one by one, not for show, for truth. Letitia didn't return the salute. She stepped forward, pulled her nephew in, and whispered, "You didn't have to do that." Tyler replied without hesitation, "No, Auntie." They needed to see it, and that was it, the moment. Not loud, not theatrical, just necessary. The same usher who had blocked her before now stood to the side like a velvet rope with legs. Eyes down. Clipboard still in hand, now feeling more like a shield than a tool. Parents who had stared through her now shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. A few looked up, not at her, but toward her, like they finally understood what they'd been missing. She wasn't demanding a seat. She was restoring its meaning. Tyler led her toward the front row, and this time, nothing stopped them. The 6 colleagues, judges, attorneys, inspectors, whatever they had once been, followed a few steps behind. They didn't sit, they stood, arms crossed, not as bodyguards, but as witnesses. One of them, with a hint of irony in his voice, muttered just loud enough, "About damn time." And at the podium, the dean, now pale enough to blend in with the floral arrangement, gripped his prepared speech like a drowning man clutches protocol. He cleared his throat, eyes darting toward the scene, then back to the microphone. And just like that, the script he'd spent weeks perfecting was now irrelevant. The dean opened his mouth like a man trying to steer a sinking yacht with a laminated script. We are honored today to have many distinguished guests," he began, voice trembling like a career on the brink, "including some we should have recognized sooner." It landed with the elegance of a corporate apology typed by legal counsel and posted at midnight. A few claps trickled in, weak, unsure, the kind of clapping people do when they don't know whether they're celebrating justice or just trying not to get quoted in the local paper. Then came another wave, louder, unrehearsed, real. This wasn't applause anymore, it was recognition. Row by row, palms found rhythm, posture softened, and faces recalibrated. The same auditorium that had moments ago played gatekeeper to appearances was now remembering what substance looked like. But Letitia, she didn't flinch, didn't nod, didn't rise to meet it. She just sat, quietly, beside her nephew, back straight, head forward, hands calmly folded on her lap. She didn't come for ovations. She came for a chair with his name on it. She came because Tyler asked her to. She came for that seat, that moment. While the dean tried to reattach his dignity with a nervous pivot back to his speech, Letitia reached into her coat pocket. Not for a rebuttal, not for a press release, but for something far more personal. The card. The one Tyler had written by hand. "Aunt Letitia, I want you in the front row." She reread it, word for word. Then, folded it again with the precision of someone who knew the difference between being invited and being included. Because respect doesn't come from access, it comes from acknowledgement. And this crowd, this room, this school, it was finally, painfully learning the difference. After the ceremony, no one rushed for the exits. Not today. The same students who had barely glanced at her on their way in now slowed down, one by one. Some offered handshakes, others nodded quietly. Some didn't speak at all, but their eyes said it plainly. We saw, and now we understand. One mother, stylish, composed, carefully curated, stopped beside Letitia. Her voice didn't tremble, but it humbled. She placed a hand gently on Letitia's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for raising him right." Letitia didn't reply. She simply offered a brief nod, her expression unreadable, because real leadership doesn't gloat. It witnesses. It absorbs. It endures. The crowd thinned eventually. The bouquets wilted under flashbulbs. The press moved on to less complicated narratives. But 6 figures remained. They approached Letitia like a formation, not out of habit, but conviction. Men who had once stood beside her in courtrooms, behind closed doors, in high-stakes rooms where decisions carried generational consequences. One of them stepped forward, same measured gait, same calm gravity, and placed something small in her hand. Letitia turned it over. A coin, circular, heavy in symbolism, light in vanity, a DOJ unit challenge coin. Rare, personal, the kind passed not for hierarchy but for history, not a reward but a reminder. The man met her eyes and said simply, "For everything you carried when the rest of us hesitated." And for a brief moment, for just that breath of time, Letitia James smiled. Not because they applauded, but because they remembered. Now the room may have clapped, the dean may have backpedaled, and the crowd may have shifted. But the real story wasn't in the correction. It was in the silence that had come before it. And what remained now was what would happen after. The man's voice didn't tremble. It landed with the steadiness of someone who had once watched her cross a courtroom floor to face down an entire legal department armed with nothing but a folder and moral clarity. "You were always the standard," he said, his gaze firm. "We never forgot." Letitia didn't speak. She didn't need to. She closed her fingers around the coin, cold, precise, etched with weight far heavier than its metal. A unit challenge coin from colleagues who knew that loyalty doesn't come from title, but from tenacity. She nodded once, sharp and measured, then turned to look at Tyler. And for the first time that day, her lips parted in a small, quiet smile. She didn't smile because she won. She smiled because he saw. She hadn't asked for a spotlight. She had shown up, on time, dressed with purpose, bearing no entourage, no press, and no illusion. Her pride didn't need an introduction. It wore no badge, no sash, no curated biography in the program brochure. It walked in quietly, sat where it was told not to, and waited. Because that's what real service looks like. And when the gatekeepers tried to shove her to the perimeter, when they measured her worth by dress code and clipboard metrics, it wasn't her resume that saved the moment. It was the people who remembered, who'd seen her work, who knew the difference between being visible and being valuable. They didn't stand because she demanded it. They stood because they owed it. Letitia James had spent her life testifying without a pulpit, indicting without vengeance, and building pathways where others placed velvet ropes. And when it came time to measure who belonged, her silence was louder than the institution's entire audio system. Because some heroes don't write memoirs, they leave receipts. Some don't sit at the table. They rebuild it, and some, like her, don't need a microphone to be heard. They just need not to be erased. So now the question isn't whether they knew who she was. The question is why they had to be reminded. Have you ever known someone like Letitia? Someone the world tried to marginalize, not because they were unworthy, but because their dignity didn't come wrapped in credentials the crowd recognized? Someone who stood in the background until the silence grew too loud to ignore? If so, say their name. In the comments, out loud, at the next meeting where someone doesn't quite fit the list, at the back of the room where they're told to wait just until we verify their identity. Because here, in Voices That Shouldn't Be Forgotten, we believe the loudest respect is the kind that doesn't need to ask. If this story spoke to you, share it, not for clicks, but for correction. Subscribe if you believe seeing someone isn't the same as knowing them. And next time you see a woman standing quietly at the edge of a room, look again. She might be the reason you ever got through the door.